Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Non-Toxic Environment Show. This is your host, Andy Pace. If you have listened to me for many years, you'd probably hear me say that there's this connotation that people have with chemical sensitivity or mold sensitivity being all in your head. And I use air quotes with that. The fact of the matter is that chemical sensitivity, mold sensitivity, these do cause physical reactions, but they also cause mental reactions, brain reactions, reactions that the brain tries to compensate for. And I've said this many times over the years that the adrenaline release, the fear of having a physical reaction can cause an adrenaline release. It can cause our bodies to shut down. And so while I've been able to say this based upon my anecdotal evidence over the years, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physician. Well, we're changing this today. We are bringing on a true expert, Dr. Morgan Cowger with the Amen Clinics in Seattle. And Dr. Cowger is a board-certified adult psychiatrist. She completed her undergraduate degree at Portland State University, then attended medical school at Western University of Health Sciences, College of Osteopathic Medicine of the Pacific Northwest, and then completed her general psychiatry residency through the University of Hawaii. She feels passionate about viewing mental wellness through a holistic lens and identifying organic factors that contribute to psychiatric symptoms, and is working on completing a fellowship in functional psychiatry from Psychiatry Redefined. This discussion is going to be about these issues, like what happens in our brain, what happens in our body when we come across an unknown toxin or other health poison, such as mold or bacteria. And she and I have worked together in the past on projects, and I've always found her approach fascinating, in the fact that there is now some research going into this, and there are ways that we can cope with this problem of almost PTSD from having mold problems in the past or a chemical exposure in the past. And Dr. Cowger is the perfect person to talk about this. And so I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Cowger. Please tell us, beyond the bio that I read, which is amazingly impressive, by the way, but why did you get into this particular field?
Thanks, Andy. I'm so glad to be meeting with you today. I'm very excited. So I went into psychiatry after medical school. I thought, I'm really interested in psychiatry. Let's do this. But during my residency, I always felt like there was something missing. I'm like, oh, it's not, we're doing a lot of medications. We're doing some diet and exercise. And so I started doing this fellowship through Psychiatry Redefined. It's with Dr. Greenblatt. And through that, there's just this world that has opened up into other causes and things that can contribute to psychiatric symptoms that are physically based. And what's super interesting to me is thinking about, well, is psychiatry and psychology really what we think? Or are there actually things that are contributing to how we're feeling that are based on vitamins, minerals, amino acid, environmental exposure, toxic exposure? And I'm now working at the Amen Clinic here near Seattle, Washington, and we do brain scans. We do SPECT scans that look at the blood flow to the brain. That can tell me what parts of the brain are overactive or underactive. And in that, we do a lot of work with brain health. And it's really interesting to see people whose brains look, we would say, kind of a toxic appearance. And we think about all the things that can contribute to that. And so it kind of led me down this exploration of the quality of our houses. Because you and I talked about, I was looking for a house. I was having some trouble with some smells in it and everything. And I started looking into it more and going, what are we exposed to in our houses? And so I did the enthalpy test. I looked for VOCs, mold, and formaldehyde. And I'm starting to realize that a lot of what we're using in our houses, I'm not sure how good it is for our health. And so this is why we're having this conversation today, because it's really interesting, and we're going to loop it into, what happens in the body, what we can do about it. But the why is because we need to have good brain health. And if what we're being exposed to every day and where we live or where we work is affecting that, then it's going to affect us down the line, I think. And I'm really afraid of that about our overall health later in life.
Well, thank you for dedicating your career to this, because it's something that's, I've dedicated the last 33 years to myself, and I'm obviously not a medical professional. I'm a, building science guy. I'm a architectural design consultant, but I've been working with people with extreme chemical sensitivities, mold sensitivities for the last 33 years. And one of the common questions I get is, did you study science or did you study chemistry? Nope, I'm just a very, very curious person. And I also, I'm the type of person that wants to get down to the bottom of things for whether it's for myself or for people. But somebody brings to me a topic and says, I don't know why whenever I walk into this room, I constantly get headaches, or this happens or that happens. It makes me think, why is that? And when you and I met a few months ago,
Mhm.
it fascinated me, this topic, because I have been saying for years that chemical sensitivity, and of course what Western medicine tells people is that, oh, chemical sensitivity, it's in your head. You're making this up. There's no medical reason why you have these sensitivities. And I know that's wrong. I know that's wrong anecdotally because of the 10,000 chemically sensitive individuals I worked with in the first 10 years of my career. And they told me, no, no, it's real. Okay, I get it. But I also realized that the brain is a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
And if the brain senses potential danger, the
Hmm.
brain can put our bodies into fight or flight. And all of a sudden, and I mean, you can explain this better than I can, all of a sudden, it's like this adrenaline release. I'm having a reaction to an unknown thing because my brain's trying to protect me. And so that's hard to explain to people who have chemical sensitivity without offending them. And so, because a lot of times they think, yeah, but you're saying it's in my head. No, I'm saying your brain is protecting you. What do you think about that? And what's a good approach with that topic?
So I think it's even before the brain.
Okay.
So our first line of defense, one of our first lines of defense are our mast cells.
Ah,
Mast cells are in, all of our cells, they're part of our immune system. When the mast cells detect something toxic or irritating, like mold, formaldehyde, VOCs, whatever it is, they can release stuff. Histamine, cytokines, which are inflammatory communicators. And so what happens is there's this thing called cell danger response. Cell danger response is body-based. So when people walk in a room and they're like, I don't feel good, I feel really, I can't relax, it's a body mechanism. Now, that body mechanism is tied into everything else. It's tied into how stressed we feel. It's tied into other things, and we can do things to reduce that. But it's a real response, and it's also about our mitochondria. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells. They are monitoring for danger in the environment. What happens is that people can get sensitized to things. What's causing sensitivity in the first place? There's a lot of things. Some people are genetically sensitive. Some people have had prior mold exposure. Some people have Lyme or Lyme co-infection. So like Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, all these different things can sensitize the nervous system. And like I said, mold is one of those things that's can really sensitize it. So we're kind of looking at this conglomeration of things, and people who have had prior exposure, things like that, can just be more sensitive. Some people have more sensitive nervous systems as well. If we look at people who are neurodivergent, perhaps on the autism spectrum, they can also have sensitive nervous systems. So the body-based approach, it is something that's actually happening. And it's those people who, to your point, people are like, no, it's all in your head. You can't smell that. What are you talking about? It's not even a thing. but they can because it's oversensitive. And they
Okay.
can't help it. Their body can't help it. And it's trying to protect them.
So the actual mechanism for these contaminants, pollutants, chemicals, what have you, in the air or in an area, is it inhalation? Is it through the mucous membrane, through the skin even? And that takes a little longer, but it can still happen. I mean, what is the actual mechanism that could trigger that reaction?
It's a variety of things. So most of the time, and this is my education so far, right? There are people who know more than me, but this is my understanding of it so far. A lot of it's inhalation. So if we're looking at formaldehyde, formaldehyde is a lot of inhalation. I think there's some not as good on the skin to contact. VOCs, volatile organic compounds, those are also probably inhalation. Mold is, I think, probably both.
Okay.
Inhalation plus skin. And so if you're in a moldy environment, there's spores. You can't see the spores, but they're everywhere. But they're getting into your skin and stuff like that. And like, which is my point, like some people are just genetically sensitive. So as you know, that there can be 5 people living in a house. One person is extremely sensitive to the mold. The rest of the 4 are like, what are you talking about? There's no problem.
Yeah.
But it can be a variety of things that we see. It can be a whole lot of different things. And I think Brian Carr from Yes We Inspect talks about this. He says some people can have skin stuff. Some people just have runny nose. And other people, when we're looking at more than just an allergy, it's a toxicity. So mold can get in the body and it can colonize. It can colonize the sinuses, it can colonize the GI tract. And so then there's mold that starts to develop in the body. And there's a variety of factors that can make that worse. We think that heavy metals, if somebody has a lot of metals, that can make it worse. My perspective as well is if they've got any kind of sleep apnea and they can't regulate their nervous system very well, and they can't eliminate if their gut isn't moving well, maybe that stuff kind of sticks in the body more. So there's a variety of ways to get it in the body, and it can be harder to get it out. But there's a variety probably of exposures.
So I've already written down about 12
Additional questions.
more questions just from that one answer.
Perfect.
It's great. This is so fascinating because again, all the years of talking to people about this, I didn't have an education behind this. I had just a lot of speculation and anecdotal information. But so several years ago, maybe about 10 years ago, when the genetic testing is at the HLA-DR gene,
Yeah,
is that it?
HLA-DR. Yep, DRQ.
That shows that somebody has the genetic predisposition to be sensitive to mold.
Or in difficulty detoxing it.
And if okay, great.
The
So
HLA is immunohistocomplex, so it's our immune system, but there's also genes that might be difficulty with detox. I think the HLA is just the immunohistocomplex in the immune system, but there's
okay.
other ones that have to do with detox as well. I think so.
So I remember 30 years ago giving presentations to architectural firms and design firms and talking about how trying to describe what chemical sensitivity is that about 25% of the population of the world has a chemical sensitivity, whether they know it or not. So,
Right.
and what happens is a lot of folks like me, years ago, I used a certain type of soap, body soap, and I got a rash.
Yeah.
That's a chemical sensitivity.
Yes.
There's a certain chemical ingredient in epoxies and urethanes, and I've been in. If I come in contact just with what's in the air, I will get a type of rash that turns my skin to leather.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, and I've had that twice, that reaction, and it's not fun. So now I
Wow.
know though exactly what's causing it. It's the isocyanates that are found in these types of coatings. But I used to tell people 25% of the population has a chemical sensitivity. Now I find that the HLA-DR gene, about 25% of the population carries that.
Mm.
So I'm doing math in my head. Is it the same person? Is it the same population that has this? And so is there a connection between somebody being mold sensitive and somebody being chemically sensitive?
I don't know. I would say it's likely, and I would need to do some research on it. But it seems like it could be likely, and especially if the people who are mold sensitive due to the HLA genes, if they've been exposed to mold, their system is sensitized to
Mhm,
it.
mhm.
So now to your point, it's the immune system, it's the cell danger response. It's now when they're exposed to it again, it's worse.
Yep.
Right. And we know I think that's been documented.
Okay.
So what would be interesting to see if there's a study that's looked at that, if there's a head-to-head study, and to see if there's overlap. Um, because that could be an interesting thing. And there's nothing wrong with the sensitivity. That's the thing, is that so much in our environment has changed. There's so many more chemicals and things like that we just don't know, how they're going to affect us. For example, there was a book, The Development of the Subconscious Mind by Alan Shore. He talks about how much endocrine disruptors could potentially be affecting the brain when we are in utero. So an endocrine disruptor is like BPA. Everybody's heard of BPA, the plastic. Okay.
Mhm.
And so now they're making a lot of BPA-free products, but what if they have BPS in it? So it's still an endocrine disruptor, but it's not been labeled with that red flag. And
Mhm.
so the theory is that it's actually affecting development in utero. So if the mother has a lot of or the person carrying the baby has a lot of BPA in their system or endocrine disruptors, what is that doing to the development of the fetus? So it can be potentially affecting brain development. And then I wonder about, does that increase the sensitivity as well?
Mhm.
So I think the risk is we're having so many things in our environment that we didn't used to previously. We're using building materials that are potentially affecting people. And as I was looking at some articles, there's so many connections between even formaldehyde and cognition, risk for cancers, depression. And so what I don't know is, and what I'd love to see if I can ever do this is finding people who have formaldehyde exposure and looking at the brain scans and seeing if they're toxic.
Mhm.
Um, so that would be an interesting thing. The last thing I'll say about your question is the people who are sensitive to it, are they the only ones who are showing effects? Or are there people who are being exposed to things but can't tell they're being bothered? Is it still affecting their brain?
Well, uh, I think that's a big yes.
Yeah.
It's just that some people have the ability to mask it, so
Or detox it, or
right,
their mast cells aren't annoyed.
right.
Yeah.
Now let's take a specific example.
Yeah.
Um, 30 years ago, the EPA building in Washington, D.C.,
Hmm.
they installed brand new carpet throughout the most of the building.
Okay.
And within a couple of days, something like 1,200 people inside the building left because of exposure. They
Oh my
left the
gosh.
building because of high chemical exposure. Some of them to this day are still on permanent disability. That was the EPA building, which is kind of ironic.
So ironic.
Yeah.
The epic of all
Yes.
ironies.
Right. Right. And so,
Oh wow.
um, but what this taught us is a couple of things. Number one, it taught us that even though we try to be as good as we can with chemical exposure and so forth, if you had 3,000 people working in that building and
Yeah.
less than half of them actually had a reaction, and but and then less than 1% or might be on permanent disability, that tells us that everybody's a little bit different and where they are in their own personal health journey in life. We use it's sort of this expression that everybody's born with this 55-gallon drum in their body that
Yes.
chemicals go into throughout the years, and there's a spigot on the bottom that filters out the chemical. Well, at some point, that bucket fills up and it starts to overflow. And once that happens, you can't stop it
Yeah.
unless you completely detox and get away from those exposures and so forth.
Yep.
And so some people have no problem with this, other people's have a huge problem. The other thing
Agreed.
that it taught us is when we look at building materials, and this is what my specialty is, it doesn't matter what the VOC content is. It matters what the toxicity is of the ingredients.
Okay.
VOCs, volatile organic compounds, are regulated by the EPA 100% because of outdoor air pollution. Has
Mm.
nothing to do with human health,
Ah,
the regulations. So when you talked about before, this is a perfect analogy, when BPS came out to replace BPA, they're both dangerous. One's regulated, one's unregulated. Well, in 20 years, BPS will be regulated too.
yes.
But by
Yes.
then, they would have invented another plastic to get around the regulation.
BP something
Yeah,
else. Yeah, yes.
exactly. With
Yeah.
chemicals, this is the exact same thing.
Yes.
You can take out the ethylene glycol from paint and just add in acetone, which we
Yeah.
know acetone is a dangerous solvent, but the EPA considers it zero VOC because it does not contribute to outdoor air pollution. Therefore, many paint companies still use it.
But it's affecting her health.
It is for sure,
Yes.
but there's no regulation against that.
And I think the US is less, they have a lower threshold of saying something that's dangerous. We know this from the food argument that is now becoming a lot bigger. And for me, the food argument is the same as the building environment argument, is that yes, people are being fed, yes, we have houses, but what's the cost? What's the quality of what we're doing?
Right.
Because yes, we're meeting a need now, but what does it look 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line where is their health? And that is, I think, potentially creating a huge burden here. And what was I going to say about the food? Can't remember where I was going with that. But it's
There's
the
too many good thoughts here.
there's too many good thoughts. It's just there's so many things in our environment that the US has a lower threshold. So they're less likely to say, oh, it's a problem until there's documentation that there's a problem.
Mhm.
Other countries, parts of Europe, Canada, I think they're more likely to say, oh, there's a little bit of a problem. Let's pull it back. Let's figure this out.
Mhm.
But I think the US are like, you gotta prove it to us that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that way, it's to your point, 20 years from now, BPS is going to be an issue. So we have all of these exposures. We don't know what these chemicals are even doing to us.
Oh,
And then, oh, actually, that's a problem. Yeah. And this has happened time and time and again throughout the history of medicine.
so many interesting things here. And the first thing that comes to mind is red dye number, whatever, that was just finally banned
Red
after all these
dye.
years.
Yes.
So the way the EPA works is that if a new chemical is brought to market and it's submitted to the EPA, if they don't test it and approve it or reject it within a certain amount of time, they just rubber stamp it approved.
Oh,
And then it goes into the market, and it's up to class action lawsuits to take things off of the market. And the EPA has a backlog of something like 6 or 7 years worth of
dear.
testing. So forget it. Anything new comes out, it's brought to market. Whereas in other countries, it has to be approved first before it
Yes.
goes to market. So it's allowing the free market a little too much leeway in this. And we are now the guinea pigs.
We are the guinea pigs.
So, and the other thing I wanted to talk about is in the history of humans walking on Earth, it's been an absolute. I mean, if you take a yardstick as the measure of how long humans been walking the Earth, it is literally the thickness of a human hair at the end of that yardstick, where we've been exposed to electromagnetic fields from man-made activities, carbon-based chemicals from man-made activities,
Yeah.
and all these other things that we're dealing with right now. It's been 150 years, roughly.
Oh, yeah. So new.
So how do we expect? I mean, it takes tens of thousands of years for humans to adapt to something that happens.
Yeah.
We're now trying to do it in decades, in generations. It's not going to be that fast.
I don't think we're going to adapt
Right.
to our chemicals. And your point, EMS is everywhere and people aren't aware of it. I mean, even this isn't an argument of of cars. Now, this is I'm gonna shelf most of this, but what I'm just saying is that I had rented a car that was a hybrid. I loved it. It was great, but every time I had a headache. I don't think they're shielding the cars properly, and so
Sure.
people are having issues. And so we're putting stuff out there, but we're not aware. And to your point, most people tolerate it fine. But even though they tolerate it, it doesn't mean it's not affecting their health.
Right.
And so now we're seeing, oh, it's the canaries in the coal mine, blah, blah, blah. But Andy, I think the canaries in the coal mine will show the way of the future.
They
They will show
will.
the way of the future for health because they're saying, hey, there's problems. There's problems here. We can't keep using all these things. You know,
Mhm.
people are having health issues, things like that. So, and this is all about, you know, how do we survive as a species? How do we make things work? And I think we're eventually going to get it figured out, but I don't think we're going to adapt. I mean, look how long it took the Victorian people, the Victorian culture, to realize that maybe heavy metals aren't good. It took them years and years and
Right.
years. And also, to that point, there's bioaccumulation.
Mhm.
So if you look at fish in the ocean, you know, you start with plankton and then krill and then fish and then whales, you know, so they all are accumulating all of the other things that the things that they ate got. So are we bioaccumulating chemicals and heavy metals?
Mhm.
I don't know, but it seems like people have gotten a lot more sensitive in the last 50 years or so.
There's got to be, and from a genetic standpoint, these markers, these dots on the genetic string that
Yeah.
say, well, you wouldn't have had that unless three, four, 5 generations ago they weren't exposed to lead and asbestos and this and that.
That's
And
right.
so, what I do like, and I've been at this for a very long time, and I can tell you that I have never been more excited to be in this field because I believe we finally have focus being put onto these things,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just the canaries in the coal mines, screaming about there's a problem here. Now there's some science behind it. There's actually some research dollars going into it,
Yeah.
and I credit a lot of that, the silver lining in these dark clouds, to COVID, because
Yeah.
all of a
Yeah.
sudden people have an awareness of their indoor environment, what it's doing to them, and
Mhm.
companies are saying, you know what, maybe there is a better way.
Maybe there's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know, the concept of chronic fatigue syndrome, I think that was around maybe the 80s. People in Lake Tahoe had all gotten sick, or a lot of people, and then like suddenly they just couldn't, they were so tired they couldn't do it anymore. And then for many years, so many doctors were like, oh, chronic fatigue, it's all in your head. You're just
Hmm.
tired, lazy, blah, blah, blah. But we know that a lot of things affect it. Exposures, infections, chronic latent viruses, things like that are potentially causing it. And to your point, with COVID, a lot of people are having fatigue issues now.
Yes.
And so, yeah, there's more of a focus on what's actually going on. And because it's affecting so much of the workforce, people are like, oh, we should probably do something about this and figure it out.
Yeah. This is a
Yeah.
conversation you and I probably will be having, when I will be reaching out to you because, not only have I had COVID, I had the original OG version.
Wow.
Um, and I haven't gotten a cold since, by the way, which is amazing because I have natural, immunity. But I've also had MRSA for the last 10 years.
Oh,
And I've been on antibiotics, high strength antibiotics, for years. And I probably will for the rest of
interesting.
my life.
Wow.
Yeah. So, that's going to be a topic for a private phone call with you and I at some
Yeah.
point.
Have you come in and we can look at you.
Yes.
I'm not licensed in your state, but we have, I think, 11 or 13 locations all around the country, and we've got providers licensed in each state.
Okay.
So
Well, this is the perfect segue then, because I want to talk to you about,
yeah,
you know, the Amen clinics,
yeah,
um, what you do in your practice personally when somebody works with you, and really, how does this tie together? And if somebody has been dealing with chronic health issues for a very long period of time, I know both the physical and mental strain it takes on somebody. And what can they expect working with you and with the clinic?
Sure. So I'm a board certified psychiatrist. I see adult patients, and I also have some training in functional and integrative care, like I was mentioning with the Psychiatry Redefined Fellowship. And so that means I've done a traditional psychiatry residency. I went to medical school, I did 4 years of residency, and now I'm board certified in psychiatry. So if people come and see me, what can they expect from the Amen Clinic? We have a really comprehensive approach. So that means there's a lot of touch points, and we're trying to get a comprehensive history. So if somebody wants to come see us, they just give us a call, say, I'd like to make an appointment. We can do SPECT scans. So a SPECT scan, like I was mentioning earlier, kind of looks at the blood flow. And the SPECT scan is a single positron emission computer tomography. So it's not a CT scan, but it's actually looking at where the blood flow goes. And what that helps me think about is, what are the different factors that might be affecting the brain? What parts of the brain are overactive and underactive? It's a great look to see as a psychiatrist about what the brain is doing. I had, in my residency, I had done an elective where we did EEGs, which is electroencephalogram, so that's brainwave output, and that was cool. But this, where we actually get a three-dimensional image of the representation of the blood flow of the brain. That's really awesome for people who have done everything, they're still having symptoms, or they have had a head injury. We see a lot of people with head injuries, dementia, memory, cognitive issues. And we go into it saying, let's get your comprehensive history. Was there anything timeline that makes sense? Do you have any exposures? I ask all the time about mold, tick bites, exposures at maybe infections. And COVID's been a question too, because that can cause cognitive slowing, especially to I think it's the prefrontal cortex, which is up here. And so I really want to see what are all the factors leading into somebody's health. And we find a lot of things just based on trying to work it up. And I always tell people I work it up like an onion. I peel it off one layer at a time. So what somebody can expect to come and see me is that they have a really comprehensive intake. There's lots of questionnaires, a really big history. They can do 1 or 2 SPECT scans. 2 gives me good views because I see when they're concentrating and when their brain is relaxed. And our first appointment will be, I've already read through their history. I'll summarize it. I'll ask them additional questions, and then we'll go into the results where we look at the brain scans and make meaning of them. And so for me, what this comes down to is, so much of this is body and brain health that can affect what mental health looks like.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a really interesting and exciting frontier in psychiatry, because psychiatry has come a long way and it still has a lot of ways to go. But I don't think the answers are always, oh, just it's a medication, here's what you need.
Right.
That's symptom management, but what I really want to do is look at underlying causes. So are things that have gone into somebody's health that's contributing to how they're feeling
Right.
and their responses to things? We've found a lot of things that are really interesting.
Wow. It's just so many different things pop into my head about, I mean, this is not, the lay down on the couch and tell me what your story is, and I'll have a notepad taking
Yeah.
notes,
Yeah.
this is like real, for me, very interesting science. I think about the families that I work with where the kids are suffering from PANS or PANDAS because of mold
Yes.
exposure,
Yes.
and it's turning into almost like violent projections from the kids. And then, again, Western medicine wants to throw on SSRIs and here you go. And now for your life, you're not actually dealing with the issue. You're just dealing with a symptom of the issue, but causing so many other problems with it.
Yeah. And medications, don't get me wrong, can be really helpful. I still use medications all the time, but I always go in with the thought that, hey, we're going to do standard of care, but we're still going to look for underlying causes.
Yeah.
So, and medications can help, especially for PANS and PANDAS, which is an autoimmune encephalitis response to something triggering, something inflammatory, mold, infection, stuff like that. I've managed, I'm not as good as some of my colleagues with PANS and PANDAS, but I have a little experience, and I also know when to look for it. And even other kinds of encephalitis, which is brain infection. And
Mm,
so what we're looking at is an immune response and an inflammation response.
okay.
And so what do mold, VOCs, formaldehyde, latent infections all have in common? Inflammation.
Right.
And so we see just the brain goes haywire because it doesn't function normally. Did you ever read that book, Brain on Fire?
I have not.
It's such an interesting book, and I'm gonna say her name wrong, so I'm gonna look it up. Um, Brain on Fire book. They also did a movie out of it, but it's Susanna Cahalan. I'm not saying it right, sorry, but it's Brain on Fire. And she has an encephalitis that was caused by an autoimmune response to a receptor in her body, and that affected her brain. We can also see this kind of like inflammation encephalitis from mold, infections and stuff like that, that you can't test as easily as you can for some of those things. So there's other ways to test for it and look for it. But it's an inflammatory response. The immune system goes haywire, and that can happen a lot with mold. And so when the brain is not, responding like it traditionally does, you can have a wide variety of symptoms: anxiety, opposition, violence, psychosis, mania. Uh, you can even have something we call catatonia, which is inability to move as well. So there's a variety of things. And so if somebody comes to me and they say, yeah, like suddenly a week later or a month after this, or, we moved in this same house and I'm having all these symptoms, it's like,
Mm.
house.
You know, it's interesting you say that because one of the questions I want to ask before we have to wrap up, I want to say, when people reach out to you into the clinic, they want to, all right, I want to start on my path to try to heal. For me, one of the easiest things I can tell my clients, and when they're telling me that they have mold sensitivities or chemical sensitivities, I'm going to tell them change of venue.
Yeah.
Um, everything that they describe to me is because they're experiencing something either in that house or even in that location. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had to have clients move out of Georgia to Idaho. And some people can do that. Most people cannot.
Yeah.
As as a psychiatrist, how do you approach that with somebody when you know deep down that their best path forward is to literally move 1,000 miles away because they will get out of the environment that's causing the problem? How do you handle that?
I think it's a really difficult conversation on many factors. So one is we first need to figure out what it is,
Mhm.
right? Most of the time it's been mold, but now that I'm investigating formaldehyde, I start asking about, do you have carpets in your house? Is it a new build? Something smelly? So it's first figuring out what it is, and that takes
Yeah,
investigation. The
right.
second is, are they able to change anything? So people who are renting often have little recourse because sometimes their landlords are like, I'm not going to change anything. What are you talking about? It's an issue with you. But some landlords are like, yeah, okay, I'll change these things around, but you know, it I think it's an issue of as well finance. Does somebody have the means to do it? And I worry that people who are living in houses of lower quality that cost less, they're actually a greater risk of these chemicals being in their house, and they
Right.
have less means to move out of them. So people are getting stuck.
Yeah.
And so how do we navigate this moving forward when we're using building products that are toxic and we're using building products that have a high likelihood of mold? I mean, just sheetrock.
Mhm.
Andy, sheetrock is basically just mold waiting to happen because it's from wood and there are mold spores in it. And so once it gets wet, high likelihood it's going to potentially create mold. So I feel like we're set up for failure,
Yeah.
you know, and it's becoming more of an issue. It's not just a small percent of the population is getting bigger, and what are we going to do about it? And I think
Right.
we need to figure that out, not only as a country but as globally.
Hmm.
Because I think our building practices may be different than some places, right?
Sure.
Other places use plaster, concrete, this sort of thing. We use a lot of um, 2x4s and uh, drywall.
Hmm.
So we got to figure this out,
Hmm.
right?
We
I don't want 70% of our population having dementia when they're 60. Is that going to happen? No, but is that what I'm afraid of? Yeah,
well,
I'm
that's
afraid about the long-term game here.
yeah, long term. I mean, I don't see us getting better with this. Boy, this is a huge topic, but the way we build homes in the United States is all about cheaper, faster, better performance, not necessarily for the health or for the occupant, but better performance out of the crews and maximizing the dollar to get the house built in a certain way. Uh, so about a year ago, I joined the board of an organization called Change the Air Foundation, which is
Oh, good.
it's a 501(c)(3) that's dedicated specifically to the education um, of water and mold damage, bacteria damage in homes, and creating policy, doing research on how to improve the way we do things. And I was brought in because of my experience with building materials, specifically from a chemical standpoint. So I created a building advisory committee, and we're working with building professionals from around the country to develop a set of standards that a home, if you wanted to build a home, um, because of the fact that building code changes from area to area and building
Mhm.
materials change based upon the region of where you live,
Sure.
our standards are going to be almost like a homeowner's bill of rights. It can be added into the contract to say, here's what I need for my house. I need a house that's built with materials that do not contribute to moisture issues or mold issues. I need a house that is free of chemical off gassing, so forth. It's going to be bullet points. And if you sign this, we're going to achieve this. It'll be different from region to region how we get there. But at least we're having that conversation.
Yeah, and also it helps the homeowners because most people
Yes.
don't know, right? They're like, oh,
No.
it's a house, I'm gonna buy it, it's good.
Right.
But
Right.
then they
And
get in
so
it, if they're stuck in it.
yeah, we've been fed this artificial information for the last 30 years of what building materials cost because of the fact that we have a lot of big box stores that sell inexpensive building materials. We now all think, well, this is what it costs for the building materials. No, this is what it costs for cheap building materials, for substandard building materials.
Okay.
If you want to build a home that's designed to last 100 years, then it's going to cost more. So
Oh,
maybe we
that's
need to
fun.
get back to using materials that are designed to last longer. Wood is always problematic because it's, a food source for mold. They build homes in Europe with a lot of concrete because that's where a lot of the ingredients of concrete are mined. They don't,
Oh,
so I mean, when I was in Italy 10 years ago, we stayed in a villa that was built in the 1400s. It's still operating as a hotel. The oldest home in the United States
yeah,
is from the 1600s, and you're not allowed to go into it because it's falling apart. It's in Jamestown.
yeah.
And
Oh my
so
gosh.
we have to look at the way we do things is maybe it's expedient, cost effective. We have a lot of wood here, so we use a lot of wood, but ultimately it's not safe for the occupants. And what's happening is all these issues are occurring, and then they end up calling you because they don't know how to manage the stress of it all, manage the stress of the all the health implications. And so, it's if we could just change the way we do things, it would help down the road. But that's asking a lot.
It's gonna be a shift, but I think we're gonna have to make it. I mean, I know that our population is expanding, we need more homes, but we're to your point, we're sacrificing the quality and the long, the how long the houses are gonna last. I mean, um, and even looking at when the houses are built, if you build it during the winter and it's
Mm,
raining on the wood, what do you think is gonna happen?
yes. Yes.
I mean, it's just gonna get all that drywall. But I mean, I can tell you, even from looking at houses to even rent in the area, I mean, you just walk into so many of them and the chemical smell is overwhelming.
Mhm.
So I think and here's the thing, not everybody can buy either,
Right.
right? The housing market is just atrocious. And I mean, houses are going for $1 million. And that was never something that was a discussion previously, and it's not matching with our income. So
Right.
the ability for people to have a house, to actually change it, to get it in the way they need, that window is narrowing and people's health are suffering. So something is going to have to shift. I don't
Right.
know what it is. I think what you're doing is a great place to start, and we need to further that because we need safe houses. We can't have toxicity where we live because that's where we sleep, and we need to have safety and clean air.
Right. I think it's going to come down to, as it always does, is the consumer dictates moving
Mhm.
forward, and we need to empower ourselves, and we need to maybe look at things from a different perspective. If you're going to be building a new home, maybe we don't need it as big. Maybe we don't need it as pretty and as technologically advanced. Maybe it just needs to be healthier, smaller, easier to manage. I remember years ago I was involved with a group doing what's called Stapatya Veda architecture. It's like I'm gonna really butcher the description of it, but it's like um, as yoga is to Western medicine, Eastern Indian Western medicine. Um, Vastu is the study of design and placement. Stapatya Veda is the theory of designing and building homes, uh, and utilizing the laws of nature.
Yeah.
And one of the rules in Stapatya Veda is that every corner of every room should bring you bliss. And I've remembered this particular statement for decades now because I refer to it quite often. Maybe we don't build a 5,000 square foot home that half the rooms can't even be furnished because we can't afford it, or it's just a bunch of places for dust to settle. Maybe we build a smaller home. And I'm not saying that people who are building large homes are bad people. I'm just saying that if health is specifically in mind and your kids' health specifically in mind, I would rather have you put in the effort and those dollars into a healthier, more sustainable, long-lasting home
Yeah.
that's less expensive to maintain, less expensive when it comes to water mitigation and all that, than just trying to have a big house that looks really cool. And
Yeah.
so I don't know how that's changing people's mindsets. That's telling people to stop watching HGTV and all the home improvement shows. And that's kind of what I was getting at before, is like we have this big box mentality that we can watch a
Mhm.
show and you can remodel a bathroom in 3 days on the weekend. No, you can't. Not if you want to do it right. Not if you want to do it without mold. So this is a hard discussion to have with people from my end because I'm talking about the realities of building materials and cost. And from your end, you're trying to help them deal with the stress that a lot of times is induced by the materials and what they've been around. And a lot of times it's self-induced because of what they're trying to do and they don't know how to manage the stress of that. Building or designing is stressful enough. I wrote an article about this years ago about how to manage expectations. And very difficult for people to manage expectations of building and remodeling to begin with. Throw in the fact that they want to build a healthy house. I am acting as a psychiatrist when I should not. I'm trying to kind of sometimes talk them off the ledge, so to speak, because they think that if the house isn't perfectly healthy, then why do it at all? And I have to tell them small steps sometimes are your best foot forward. If I had a client just before this building a new house, um, they realize they can't avoid Wi-Fi and EMF completely,
Mhm.
but they're going to minimize it as much as they can in the areas where it makes sense.
Yes.
So that's
I
managing
think that's
stress,
key.
managing anxiety.
Yeah. I think doing the best that we can. And I Googled what you're talking about with the house, but it's doing the best that we can. And even if we're taking, to your point, small steps forward and minimizing things where we can, That's excellent. There are ways to deal with EMF sensitivity, decreasing what's in the home. So not putting carpet in, not putting, VOCs, things that are going to off gas, but things that are actually safe for our health. Because we can do air filters, but I can tell you, sometimes they only help a little bit. And so you can't just be in like a house that's off gassing a ton of formaldehyde and be like, oh, I'll do an air filter. It doesn't cut it to the point that it needs to be.
Right.
So I think we got to really know about the building materials. And I think, I'm not sure, but California might do a better job because they have more formaldehyde rules. And on the enthalpy test that I use and we talked about for the formaldehyde, it actually tells you what countries are recommending what parts per million.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting thing to read. And they also say about timeline. And so I think California is really low for chronic exposure. And what we're looking at is chronic exposure when you're living in the house. Yeah. It's not even you're going to work and you're exposed to it. If you're living in it, breathing it, you're in there all the time, you got to have it to be safe and clean. And yeah, sometimes small steps forward is the best way to start with it. But it needs to be in the houses that people are renting. We all need to have clean and safe houses. Yes. No matter our socioeconomic status, no matter how much money we make, no matter our health, we all need to be somewhere safe.
Perfectly put.
Yeah.
Dr. Cowger, we could go on for hours.
And I know.
We might have another time.
I need a part 2.
Right. So how would somebody get in touch with you, with Amen Clinic, and start the process?
If they want to see me, they can call our office directly. They can just put it into the browser, Amen Clinic Tukwila or Seattle, it'll come up the same. Our phone number is 425-455-7500. We've got 2 physicians here, myself and the lovely Dr. Cabran Chapik. He is a naturopath. And if I'm doing stuff that I don't know how to treat something, I send people to him because he has more experience in some areas than I do. So we are a good team. And if somebody lives in a different state, like I said, we've got clinics all around the country and providers in every state. And I feel like I should know the number for the call center. They can just Google Amen Clinics and it brings up our whole website. And our phone number is right on here, 844-687-8716. And people can inquire about the process. And even if they don't want to come see us yet, at least gathering information to see expectations, how much it costs, what the timeline might be, and how soon they can get in. It's good to gather information, but there's a lot of us doctors here at the Amen Clinic. There's a lot of us doctors and providers that are really interested in about this alternative, this brain-based approach to mental wellness. So we believe people. Yeah. Somebody comes in like, my house is killing me. I'm like, yep, gotcha. Oh, I can't function after COVID. Yep, I hear you.
Okay. Well, I will definitely put all the links also in the show notes so people can reach out to you, Dr. Cowger, and to the Amen Clinics. I know that you have a really large following on social media as well. The clinic is always producing new information and so forth. I'm going to post that as well because I really want people to follow just the entire organization, because I think what you are all doing is really wonderful. And
Dr. Amen posts a lot. He's still really active on social media. He's still extremely active in the clinic. And so he posts all the time on social media. I still have to make an account, but I will do that. And so people can come and see. Beautiful.
Dr. Cowger, thank you so much for today. I love this conversation. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. It was a pleasure. So glad we could talk.